Welcome to this channel. My name is Janet and I'm working through the King James's Bible. Today I'm in the book of Leviticus, working through chapters 22 to 24. So I'm going to get straight started with our chapter 22. Now yesterday we covered chapter 21, which was a lot about the rules of the priests, what they have to adhere to. And this chapter starts again reiterating over some of those rules we've just covered. So God is really wanting to make sure these rules are going into the priest's minds. So he goes over things like they have to stay clean and holy, that if they have a leper amongst them, they're not allowed to eat the holy food until they are pronounced clean. And it says they're not allowed to touch anything unclean, so anything like an animal or a creature or a bird, and not to touch anything that's dead, because there are severe consequences if they do that. Now the next part of this chapter covers the unacceptable sacrifices, so what is allowed and what isn't. And it starts with, for a burnt offering or to fulfill either a vow or a free will offering, you can bring a male cattle, sheep or goat, but it has to have no defect. So it can't be blind, it can't have broken bones, it can't have a sore, anything like that is not acceptable. But there is one caveat, and that is if you're bringing a free will offering, then you can bring an ox or a sheep that is deformed or stunted in its growth. But it says this will not be accepted to fulfill a vow, so that will not be accepted as a vow. It's only for a free will offering that you can have a deformed or stunted ox or sheep. Then the Lord says to Moses, when a calf, lamb or goat is born, it is to remain with its mother for 7 days. So it cannot be killed for 7 days, but on the 8th day it can be offered as a food offering to the Lord. It says, do not slaughter a cow or sheep and its young on the same day. That is not allowed. A thanksgiving offering must be eaten on the same day, so do not leave that until the next morning. That's not allowed. And then this chapter ends very loudly with, I am the Lord, keep my commandments. Okay, he said that, not me. So now let's get into chapter 23, which is covering the religious holidays, the festivals that the Lord has put down, and there are 7 of them. And it starts off quite succinctly with the Sabbath, the 7th day. That day is always a day of rest, not to be worked on, and he reiterates that so many times throughout this book. And now God declares his feasts, which start with the 3 spring feasts. The first one is the Lord's Passover, which is on the 14th day of the first month. Now the Passover, remember, is when the children of Israel, firstborns, were all saved while they were in Egypt, because the Egyptians, Pharaoh would not let them go, so God decided he would kill all the firstborns, both animals and children. And because the Israelites listened to God, they had to do a certain sacrifice, a lamb, so that their children would not be killed, and that was classed as the Passover, so that when they put blood on their doors, he knew not to kill their firstborns, just that of the Egyptians. So they are celebrating that day on the 14th day of the first month. Then immediately after the Passover is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This is the next festival, and it's a 7-day feast, with the first and last days being high Sabbaths, so high rest days. And the third and final spring festival is the Festival of First Fruits, and this was celebrated after the Sabbath, and this is to give thanks to God for the crops and the harvest. So this comes when the Israelites actually get to the promised land, because obviously when they are travelling to that land they can't grow crops. So this is sort of the celebration when they arrive there, and then God has given them all this plentiful land and they're able to grow their own foods and give themselves life. So that's why they celebrate that festival. So now we move on to the 4th festival, which is the Feast of Pentecost or Harvest, or some actually refer to it as the Feast of Weeks. Now this is a celebration of the end of the harvest, coming to an end of the season and dedicating one's life anew to God. That's why they celebrate this. This actually takes place on the 50th day after the Passover. So that's when that festival is to take place every year. The 5th festival is the Feast of Trumpets, and this takes place on the first day of the 7th month. Now this is about 2 silver trumpets that the Israelites used to call the people together to signal their direction on where they were headed when they were going towards the promised land. So it's almost like a celebration of that guidance that allowed them all, because there was thousands of them, remember, all going towards that promised land. Now the 6th festival is the Day of Atonement. That is a pretty significant day, and if you want the full details of that, check out my video about Leviticus chapter 16. You'll find all the details there. This was to take place on the 10th day of the 7th month, and this was for atoning for the Israelites' sins. It happened every year, and there's a lot of sacrifices taking place here. And the final festival, number 7, is the Feast of the Tabernacles, or you could say the Feast of Booths or Tents, because that's another name for tents, booths. So this starts on a Sunday and it lasts for 7 days, and it took place on the 15th day of the 7th month. So this was kind of a celebration of them being given these booths, these tents. God showed them how to cover themselves, because obviously when they were travelling from Egypt towards the promised land, they didn't have any houses to live in, so they had these tents to protect them from the sun, because remember, they are living out in the desert, so during the day it gets pretty hot out there. So that is chapter 23 covering all of the festivals. So our final chapter is chapter 24. Now here we cover more laws for the priests and the people of Israel to uphold. And also they tell a story of a boy who blasphemes God. So we'll get started. The Lord commands that the Israelites are to bring pure olive oil. This is how it starts. Beaten for the lamps in the tabernacle of congregation to burn constantly. So they've got to bring this pure olive oil, beaten well, bring it to the tabernacle for the priests to then keep the lamps burning continuously for the Lord. They are also to bring fine flour to bake 12 cakes continually for the Lord every Sabbath. So every Sunday they're to make these 12 cakes, and they are given to the priests to eat during the Sabbath. So that's their kind of gift, because they're doing all of this work every day of the year. These sacrifices are taking place that we've covered in many of the chapters within Leviticus. So now we'll get into this story about this boy who blasphemes God. And it says that what happened was a woman of Israel's son, whose father was an Egyptian, the son got into a disagreement with someone in the camp. Now it doesn't tell you what this disagreement was about, it just says there was a disagreement that took place and it turned into a fight. So it got quite aggressive, and this is when the boy blasphemes God's name. Now he was immediately brought to Moses, and Moses wasn't sure what to do with him. So he then asked God, what is he to do with somebody who's obviously blasphemed the name of God? And God said that he is to be stoned to death. And the consequence is pretty severe. They have to then, whoever heard him say this, have to lay their hand on his head, and basically that is putting all their sins into the boy, and then they're to stone him. And it's to let the people know that whoever curses God shall bear this sin. So pretty severe consequences again. These are not light. Things like this, if wrongdoing is not taken lightly by the Lord, it's pretty severe. So the final section in this chapter covers things. If you kill a person, then you're put to death. If you kill somebody's animal, then you must give them an animal that was the same type, same without blemish if it was blemished. So a like for like kind of thing. And it says similar for like if they are to hit somebody and they get a hit in the face, then they're to hit the other person. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That's where all that comes from. You're to give what you've taken kind of thing. And then the very end of this chapter, which is quite dark, it says it ends with the people stoning this boy as God commanded. So there we have it. Leviticus again, still very dark for me, and covering these rules that God is laying down if the people go against him in any way. So they know what they're getting into as they walk towards this promised land, how they're going to have to live. They're going to have to live pristine, clean, and keep everything right. Otherwise, they're going to be constantly sacrificing animals, constantly being killed, constantly stoned, constantly being thrown out of camp, away from their people, or childless. There's just been so many pretty severe consequences that are to be taken place if any of his rules are broken. So that closes our 3 chapters for today. We will be back again tomorrow for more in the book of Leviticus. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. Bye.